Officer and his K-9 found a tied-up girl in abandoned farmhouse. What they did next shocked everyone. The sun was already sinking when Officer Jack Turner guided his truck down the narrow farm road that wound through the fields west of town. Clouds hung heavy and low, staining the sky the color of ash. He had driven this route countless times, but tonight the air carried a strange tension, like the world was holding its breath. Beside him, Bruno shifted in the passenger seat. The old German shepherd's muzzle was streaked with gray now, his ears softer, but his instincts had not dulled. His body went rigid, nose twitching toward the horizon. Jack slowed, scanning the abandoned farmhouse that loomed ahead. Its shutters sagged, its porch sagged, its windows stared blankly like hollow eyes. For years it had sat in ruin, a forgotten relic at the edge of the county line. But tonight, Bruno whined low in his throat, claws scraping against the floorboard. He had caught a scent, one that demanded attention. Jack pulled over, hand resting on his holster out of habit, and let the dog lead. Rain began to spit from the clouds, a fine mist that darkened the dirt as Bruno padded up the warped steps. The shepherd paused at the threshold, nose to the air, then suddenly barked once, sharp, insistent. He circled the sagging floorboards, pressing his snout against a trapdoor half hidden under dust and splinters. His nails clawed at the wood, his body trembling with urgency. Jack's pulse spiked. He knelt, tugged at the rusted latch, and with a groan, the trapdoor gave way. The smell hit him first, stale, damp, human. He raised his flashlight, its beam slicing into the gloom below. There, bound hand and foot in the dirt, lay a girl. Her hair was tangled, her lips cracked, her skin pale as candle wax. Rope bit into her wrists, and her chest rose only faintly, as if each breath were a negotiation. Her eyes fluttered at the light, barely opening. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Emily Carter, the mayor's daughter, missing for 3 days, declared a runaway by some, a victim by others, and here she was, discarded in the dark like something meant never to be found. He climbed down in a rush, Bruno barking furiously above as if to summon help from the storm itself. Jack pressed trembling fingers against the girl's pulse. Weak, but there. Relief crashed through him, followed by the icy realization that whoever had put her here was still out there. The storm rumbled louder, rain now drumming against the broken roof. Jack cradled Emily against his chest, Bruno standing guard at the opening above. For one heartbeat, the world seemed to freeze on the edge of revelation. This was no simple missing person case. This was the beginning of something darker. The farmhouse on the edge of the county had always been a place whispered about in town. Children dared each other to peek through its windows, and hunters avoided its fields as if the soil itself carried bad luck. To Officer Jack Turner, though, it was simply another dot on his patrol route, a landmark too stubborn to collapse. Until now. Jack was 35, tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose quiet presence often did more to calm a room than his badge did. His uniform was worn from years of use, his hands calloused from both work and worry. He was known around town as steady, dependable, but behind the composed expression, he carried private scars. Years earlier, a drunk driver had taken his wife's life. Since then, Jack had buried himself in duty, keeping order for others because it was the only way he knew to quiet the chaos inside himself. His only constant companion through those years was Bruno. Once the pride of the county's K-9 unit, Bruno had served with ferocity and loyalty, sniffing out narcotics, tracking fugitives through woods, standing at Jack's side in raids that could have gone badly. But time spares no warrior. A torn ligament and graying muzzle had forced Bruno into retirement. Officially, he was no longer a working dog. Unofficially, Jack never stopped treating him as his partner. Their bond was too deep for paperwork to sever. Bruno might move slower now, but his eyes still burned with purpose, and Jack trusted them more than any map or tip. When Jack pulled Emily from the cellar that night, the storm soaking them both to the bone, Bruno's behavior told him more than words could. The shepherd circled, nose high, body stiff, every sense alive. Jack knew that look. It meant danger still lingered. Whoever had tied up Emily hadn't expected her to be found so soon. Emily Carter had been the town's whispered mystery for 3 long days. 17 years old, daughter of Mayor Richard Carter, she was known for her bright laugh and stubborn streak. Some in town said she had run away, others suspected worse. The mayor himself had stood at a press conference, jaw clenched, insisting the department do everything to find her. Jack had been there, watching the man's hands tremble against the podium. He had wondered then if grief or fear caused the shake. Now, kneeling on the farmhouse floor, Jack understood the truth. Emily hadn't run. She had been taken, and the precision of the crime, its secrecy, its location, spoke of something more than random cruelty. This was planned. This was leverage. As the storm eased into a steady downpour, Jack carried Emily to his truck, Bruno trotting close despite the limp in his hind leg. At the hospital, doctors rushed her inside, and Jack stood by the doorway, rain dripping from his uniform, watching as life crept back into her pale cheeks. Bruno sat beside him, tail still, gaze fixed on the door as if refusing to let her slip away again. It was later, when Emily woke and whispered the fragments of her story, that the shadows grew longer. She spoke of men she didn't know, voices sharp and cruel, of threats made in whispers about her father. She remembered documents placed on a table, papers her captors said would make him choose right. The words were blurry through her exhaustion, but one phrase stood out clear: the development project. Jack's mind clicked into gear. The proposed real estate project at the edge of town had stirred more than its share of controversy. Officially, it was meant to bring jobs and prosperity. Unofficially, rumors swirled of backroom deals and hidden agendas. Emily's kidnapping was no coincidence. It was leverage, a weapon aimed at the mayor himself. Bruno shifted at Jack's feet, a low growl vibrating through him as if he sensed the darkness tightening around them. Jack reached down, resting a hand on the dog's head. "We'll get them, partner," he whispered. "We're not done." That night, Jack drove back through the rain-slick streets, Bruno leaning into the turns as if every road carried them deeper into the heart of the mystery. The farmhouse, Emily, the whispered threats. It was only the beginning, and both man and dog knew it. The hospital kept Emily under observation, her frail body wrapped in tubes and monitors, but her spirit flickered back stronger with each hour. Jack sat in the chair by her bed, his uniform still damp from the storm. Bruno stretched across the floor like a sentinel carved from stone. Nurses passed with sympathetic glances, but Jack hardly noticed. His eyes kept drifting between the girl and the dog, between the fragile survivor and the faithful partner who had dragged him to this truth. When Emily woke fully, her gaze fell first on Bruno. She lifted a trembling hand, and the shepherd, though stiff from his own old injuries, rose and placed his nose gently against her palm. A smile, faint but real, tugged at her lips. "You found me," she whispered. Her fingers curled into his fur, and her body relaxed, as if she had been waiting for that reassurance all along. Jack felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen Bruno comfort children before, but this was different. Emily didn't just see a dog. She saw her rescuer, her protector. In her eyes, Bruno was not retired, not aging. He was the hero who had refused to leave her in the dark. Later, when her father arrived, the reunion was raw and painful. Mayor Carter clasped his daughter's hands, tears cutting through his practiced composure. Yet Emily's grip shifted back to Bruno, as though grounding herself against a truth she couldn't fully say aloud. Jack watched the mayor's jaw set tight as Emily whispered about papers and threats, her voice trembling. The politician's mask faltered, revealing something that looked uncomfortably like fear. After the mayor left to make some calls, Emily turned to Jack. They wanted him to sign something. They said if he didn't, they'd... Her voice cracked. Bruno pressed closer, tail brushing lightly against her blanket. They weren't just after me, she finished. Jack nodded, his mind already spinning. The development project, the rumors, the missing girl. It all fit too neatly to be random. But what struck him most wasn't the evidence. It was the way Emily clung to Bruno, the bond forged not in years, but in minutes of terror and rescue. Over the next days, Emily insisted on visits from Bruno. Doctors frowned at the idea of a large dog in sterile halls, but Jack overruled them. Each time the shepherd padded in, Emily's breathing eased, her nightmares lessened. She began to talk more, her words piecing together scraps of overheard conversations, mentions of warehouses, shipments, names she didn't recognize. Every fragment she offered became another thread in the unraveling of something much larger. One afternoon, while Emily sketched in the notebook Jack had brought, Bruno rested his head on the side of her bed. Jack leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching. She looked up suddenly. "He trusts you," she said. Jack tilted his head. "Bruno," she nodded. "He looks at you like you're the only one who makes sense." Jack smiled faintly, running a hand through his hair. "He's been through it all with me. We don't need words anymore. He just knows." Emily touched Bruno's ear thoughtfully. "That's how I felt when he found me. Like he knew I was still alive when nobody else did." In that moment, Jack realized the bond wasn't just between him and Bruno anymore. Emily had been pulled into it, stitched into the silent language of trust the dog had built across a lifetime. She wasn't just a victim rescued. She was part of a circle Bruno had drawn around himself, a circle that meant survival, loyalty, and hope. The connection was fragile, born from trauma, but it was real. Jack could feel it as surely as he felt the rain in his bones, and he knew, as Bruno lifted his head to meet his eyes, that this connection would be the thread that carried them into the storm yet to come. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that was anything but restful. Emily remained under guard at the hospital. Mayor Carter oscillated between fury and fear, and the department scrambled to untangle leads. But inside the sterile white room, a quieter story unfolded, one stitched from scars. Jack began to share pieces of his own past with Emily, not because he wanted to, but because she asked. Survivors often recognize each other, and Emily, though still a teenager, had seen enough darkness in that cellar to understand silence can be its own kind of prison. He told her about the night Bruno had saved his life years ago, when a meth lab raid went sideways and a hidden gunman had stepped from the shadows. The bullet had been meant for Jack's chest, but Bruno had lunged, dragging him down just as the shot cracked the air. The shepherd had taken the burn of shrapnel across his side, scars that still marked his rib cage. "I thought I was going to lose him that night," Jack said quietly, staring at the tiled floor. "But he didn't quit. He never quits." Emily brushed her fingers gently through the gray along Bruno's muzzle. "He's like you," she said. Jack shook his head. "No, I've quit before." The words came before he could stop them, and Emily's eyes softened. Bruno had been Jack's anchor after his wife's death, years earlier. One reckless driver, one wrong turn on a rain-slick highway, and the life Jack had built collapsed into twisted steel. Grief hollowed him out, left him drowning in bottles and silence until the department nearly pushed him out. It had been Bruno, patient, persistent, refusing to leave his side, who dragged him back to the surface. The dog needed walks, training, purpose. And in giving Bruno those things, Jack found fragments of his own. Still, the guilt of surviving when others hadn't gnawed at him, the guilt of failing to protect the one person he loved most. Emily's own tragedy was fresher, raw, and jagged. When she could speak of it without her voice breaking, she described the cellar, the smell of damp soil, the sound of footsteps overhead, the whispers about her father. "They said he had to sign the papers," she whispered one night, Bruno's head pressed against her arm. "That if he didn't, they'd make sure I never came home." Jack clenched his fists. He had long suspected corruption curling through the proposed development deal, but hearing it confirmed through a child's terror cut deeper. What Emily admitted next left him chilled. One of the men, he wore a badge. Jack felt his stomach drop. A cop. The betrayal was not new. He had seen officers bend to greed before, but hearing it from Emily, seeing the fear spark in her eyes, made it personal. Bruno growled low, as if he too understood. Emily's voice cracked. "I thought no one would find me. I thought I'd die down there, and my dad would sign whatever they wanted, and it wouldn't matter." Tears slid silently down her cheeks. Bruno nudged her hand insistently until she gripped his fur like a lifeline. Jack leaned forward, his voice steady though his chest ached. "You're alive because you didn't give up, and because Bruno didn't either. That matters more than what they wanted." The three of them sat in silence then, bound by their different but parallel losses. Jack, who had lost his wife. Emily, who had lost her innocence to cruelty. Bruno, who had lost his youth to service and pain, but still carried the weight without complaint. In the stillness, Jack remembered something an old trainer once told him. Dogs don't know how to abandon. They only know how to stay. Looking at Bruno, at Emily's small hand curled into his fur, Jack thought maybe humans could learn something from that. But beneath the quiet, shadows stirred. The mayor had signed nothing, and the kidnappers had lost their leverage. That meant they would return with sharper claws, desperate to silence anyone who knew the truth. The tragedies Jack and Emily carried weren't just ghosts of the past anymore. They were warnings of the storm that had already begun to gather. And when it broke, the three of them, man, girl, and dog, would be tested again, forced to stand or fall together. The warning came sooner than Jack expected. He had just walked Bruno along the hospital's back lot when the shepherd froze, ears cutting sharp against the wind. A moment later, a car screeched past the front entrance, its windows down, a shadow leaning out with something glinting in hand. Jack's instincts screamed. He shoved Bruno behind the cover of a parked truck as a burst of gunfire rattled across the lot. Nurses screamed, glass shattered, and then the car was gone, vanishing into the evening rush like a ghost. Inside, Emily was safe, shaken, crying, but unharmed. Jack stormed into the mayor's office that night, Bruno limping heavily behind. "They're escalating," he said flatly. "This isn't leverage anymore. They're cleaning up." Mayor Carter's face was ashen. He confessed what Jack had already begun to suspect. The development project was a facade, a shell for something darker. "They've been using the permits and the zoning to move product through the county," the mayor admitted, voice hoarse. "Drugs, weapons. I thought I could control it, but—" His words trailed off into shame. Jack's anger flared. "Your daughter almost died in a basement because of your silence." Bruno growled low, as if punctuating the officer's words. It was Emily's courage that steadied the room. She stepped forward, her face still pale, but her voice clear. "Then stop hiding. Help us end it." With her testimony and the scraps of information she remembered, names, addresses, whispers in the dark, a picture began to form. The center of operations wasn't at City Hall or in some boardroom. It was a decrepit warehouse on the edge of the river, long abandoned to rust and rats. On paper, it belonged to a development subsidiary. In reality, it was the beating heart of the cartel's network. The FBI agreed to move, but Jack insisted on going in with them. "Bruno found her. He'll find the rest." The agents exchanged skeptical looks at the graying shepherd, but one nod from Jack silenced them. The raid unfolded under a heavy night sky. Black SUVs lined the block, agents slipping through shadows. Jack crouched low with Bruno at his side, the leash slack between them. The dog's body hummed with tension, every sense alive. He led them through a side entrance, nose close to the ground, guiding them through a labyrinth of rusted corridors. Twice he stopped, ears swiveling, moments before hidden doors revealed armed men lying in wait. Each time, Bruno's warning gave the team the edge to disarm them before shots rang. But the deeper they pushed, the clearer it became. The criminals had planned for a siege. The warehouse was wired with exits and false walls, designed for flight. And somewhere ahead, voices shouted orders, the scrape of crates dragged across concrete. They were moving the evidence, preparing to vanish into the night. Then Bruno stopped cold, body rigid. He barked once, sharp and insistent, at what looked like a solid wall of crates. Jack ran his hand along the seams and felt air moving faintly. "Hidden passage," he said. Together with the FBI agents, they shoved the crates aside, revealing a narrow stairway plunging underground. At the bottom, the scene froze in Jack's mind forever. Men shoving duffel bags into a waiting truck, weapons stacked high, the cartel's ringleader barking orders, and standing among them, Carl Donovan, a uniformed officer, his badge gleaming even in betrayal. The firefight erupted in seconds. Bullets tore the air, shouting drowned in thunderous echoes. Jack fired, pressing Emily's whispered names into memory, his body moving like a man who had nothing left to lose. Bruno lunged into the fray, teeth clamping onto a gunman's arm, dragging him down. Pain didn't slow the old shepherd. Loyalty drove him harder than muscle ever could. Jack saw Donovan raise his weapon, aimed square at Bruno. Rage and terror collided in him. He fired first. Donovan's gun clattered away, the traitor collapsing with a cry. Agents surged forward, swarming the ringleader, slamming men against concrete, cuffing hands slick with sweat. When the echoes died, Bruno stood panting in the middle of the floor, blood streaked across his fur, eyes blazing. He had found the heart of the darkness, and together they had torn it open. But as Jack sank to one knee beside him, pressing a hand into the dog's trembling side, he knew this was not the end of their battle. This was the moment everything, pain, loyalty, survival, had led them to. And in the quiet after chaos, he realized just how much he needed this dog, not just as a partner, but as the only soul who understood the cost of staying alive. The raid at the warehouse tore the mask off Silver Creek. By dawn, news crews crowded the riverfront, their cameras hungrily capturing the parade of arrested men. Headlines screamed of corruption, cartel ties, and the betrayal of trust by Officer Carl Donovan. But inside the chaos, in a quiet corner of the command post, the true battle was still unfolding. Bruno lay on a blanket spread across the floor, his chest rising unevenly. The old shepherd's coat was streaked with blood from a gash along his ribs, his paw bent at an unnatural angle. Jack knelt beside him, hands trembling as he pressed a bandage into the wound. "Stay with me, partner," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You don't get to leave me now." An FBI medic crouched opposite, working quickly, but his eyes flicked up with the grim honesty Jack recognized. Bruno was old. Bruno was tired. This wound could take him. Jack felt the world tilt beneath him. He had already buried too much, his wife, too many brothers in blue, and the thought of losing Bruno clawed at him with unbearable weight. Emily entered then, pale but steady, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She dropped to her knees beside Bruno, her small hand stroking the gray fur along his muzzle. "He saved me," she whispered fiercely, tears streaking her cheeks. "Don't let him go." Bruno shifted his head toward her, licking her wrist with what little strength he had left. Jack swallowed the lump in his throat. "He won't," he said, though it sounded more like a plea than a promise. He bowed his head until his forehead rested against Bruno's, breathing in the familiar scent of earth and rain that clung to the dog's fur. Memories flashed, raids, rescues, quiet nights, patrolling back roads with only the steady rhythm of paws against gravel for company. Every moment of his career, every choice that had pulled him through grief, was tied to this animal. And now, after all they had endured, the thought of Bruno's light extinguishing here on a concrete floor was unbearable. The medic tightened the bandage and injected a stabilizer. "If he makes it through the next few hours, he's got a chance," he said softly. Jack clung to the words like a rope. He stayed beside Bruno, whispering steady streams of memory and promise. "Remember the time you dragged me out of the creek when I slipped on the ice? Remember the fireworks you hated and I sat with you in the squad car until they ended? You've always carried me, Bruno. Let me carry you now." The shepherd's eyes flickered open, cloudy but resolute, and his tail thumped once against the blanket, weak but deliberate. Jack's chest cracked with relief. When the mayor arrived later, disheveled and raw, Emily confronted him. She told him everything she had heard, every detail of the threats, every shadow of his compromise. He tried to defend himself, said he had been cornered, that the cartel's reach was too strong, but his daughter's voice cut sharper than any blade. "You let them use me. You almost lost me. And it was him." She pointed at Bruno, her voice breaking. "Not you, who saved me." The words shattered the mayor. He sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands, while Emily curled once more beside the shepherd, her tears soaking his fur. By nightfall, the immediate danger was past. The red vultures were finished. Donovan was in custody. Emily was safe. But the cost of loyalty lay heavy in the farmhouse air as Jack carried Bruno into his truck to drive him home. On the seat beside him, Emily reached out, her hand covering Jack's. "He'll make it," she whispered, her young voice full of conviction. Jack glanced at the dog, at the steady rise and fall of his chest, and let himself believe it. For the first time in years, he felt not just the ache of loss, but the fragile beginning of healing. Bruno had given everything, and Jack knew now that if love and loyalty had the power to rewrite fate, then his old partner was not done yet. Spring sunlight fell over Silver Creek weeks later, warm and forgiving. The farmhouse that once held only silence now rang with voices and the scrape of hammers. Volunteers had come to repair its sagging roof and patch its weathered siding, bringing with them casseroles, laughter, and the kind of neighborly resilience small towns never quite lose. Inside, Bruno lay stretched on a rug by the hearth, his chest still bearing faint scars, but rising strong and steady now. Retirement suited him better this time. Children from the town slipped him scraps of bread and knelt to hug him, whispering secrets into his ears as if he were more confessor than dog. His eyes shone, tired but content, every thump of his tail a benediction. Jack sat on the porch, sipping coffee, watching Emily sketch in a notebook balanced on her knees. She had drawn the farmhouse, the hills beyond, and Bruno sprawled in his favorite place, a medal tied loosely around his collar from the ceremony held downtown. She looked up at Jack and smiled, a real one this time, unshadowed by fear. "You think he knows?" she asked. Jack followed her gaze to Bruno. "He's always known, long before we did." Emily's father had stepped down, shamed but resolute to make amends. The town began to rebuild trust in its own way, but Jack didn't dwell on politics anymore. His world had narrowed to something far more important. The girl who had survived, the dog who had refused to abandon her, and the fragile, steadying sense of hope blooming on this patch of land. That evening, as dusk brushed the sky with violet, Jack walked the fence line with Bruno padding faithfully at his side, Emily trailing behind with her sketchbook. The field smelled of new grass, the air alive with crickets. Jack paused, resting a hand on the shepherd's head. "You've done more than any of us, old friend," he murmured. Bruno leaned into the touch, amber eyes lifting to meet his, full of the same loyalty that had carried them through fire and blood. Emily closed her book, her voice soft. "He saved me, but he saved you too." Jack's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to speak. They stood there together until the first stars pricked through the twilight, a man, a girl, and a dog, bound not by blood, but by survival, loyalty, and love. Because not all heroes wear uniforms. Some carry scars on forelegs, leaving paw prints on the earth, and deeper still, on the hearts they refuse to let break.